for cheap PC games? Check out Kingwin.net. Click the link in the description below to help support the channel and never pay full retail again.
Yo, I'm Brian P. You're watching Bad Seed Tech, and today we're taking a look at the Define R6 Blackout Edition from Fractal Design. This is a mid-tower case with an emphasis on silence. It's going to retail anywhere from $120 to $150 depending on where you find it. And for scale, here it is next to my favorite case of all time, the Meshify C, also from Fractal Design. Now, right off the bat, I'll tell you the most impressive thing about this case is that it can be used for any application you're looking for, anywhere from like a super serious button-down all business workstation to a custom flashy hardline show build, and basically all points in between. Now, you can get this thing with or without a tempered glass side panel, and it comes in 4 different colorways. The standard colorway, which is black with white hardware and white fans. You can also get an all white, a gunmetal version, or the one we're checking out today, which is the Blackout. That's an all black case with all black fans and black hardware. The front of this case will look very familiar if you've ever seen anything from the Define series before. You get a flat rectangle of brushed aluminum that's absent pretty much everything except a power LED, which is illuminated in blue. Ventilation for the front of the case is provided by these 2 pretty hefty side vents on either side. By default, this thing swings open from left to right, which is super weird. So luckily, with a couple of screws, you can move the hinges to the other side and it'll swing open from right to left as you'd expect. The inside of this front panel is also coated with this noise dampening material, which we'll see throughout various panels on this case as well. The front panel also hides this angled vented dust filter that's coated with like this mesh screen door type material, and behind that are 2 140mm fans. So these are not Fractal's high-end fans, so they don't have any rubber dampeners on the corners, but they're still damn quiet. They are black in this case, and it's super nice that Fractal includes 3 of these fans with this case. The front panel also hides a 5 1/4 inch drive bay, which you hardly ever see on a case anymore, and it really speaks to the flexibility on offer here. Along the bottom of the case, you'll also get a full-length front-to-back dust filter that you can pull out from the front instead of the rear, so you don't have to move your case away from the wall. As shipped, your default I/O on the front panel will have 2 USB 3, 2 USB 2, your audio, your power button, and a slightly recessed reset button. You can get an I/O panel here that has USB-C. It's available at a separate cost. It's like $20 on Newegg if you really need to have that. The top panel is their latest revision to their ModuVent technology. What that basically means is it can either be a flat noise-dampened panel with no airflow, or you can pull that apart and underneath you'll also have a mesh dust filter that's breathable. It's got angled vents pretty much like the front of the case. Removing this panel is done with a large button on the rear of the case, and pulling it out completely reveals an also removable fan mount or radiator mount that also has a 25.4mm hole pre-stamped in it if you want to drop in your own fill port. The tempered glass side panel here is absolutely gorgeous. It's got a little bit of tint to it. There's no thumb screws or holes or any framework of any kind. There's just these little ball connectors that snap into these little receiving ports on the case itself, and the whole design's completely toolless. It snaps in really firm. The only time you ever actually have to put the thumb screws in the back is if you plan on transporting this case. This leaves the tempered glass with no exposed hardware, and it looks very clean. The other side panel has the same noise dampening that we see throughout the case. It uses the same mechanism, the same toolless design, so theoretically, if you could get your hands on another glass panel from Fractal, these 2 panels are interchangeable. Moving into the case, we also get this big vented Psu Shroud that runs pretty much the length of the case. We also get this really unique side panel here that's stamped with the Fractal Design logo. Now, this storage plate is kind of the money shot for the whole case here, because not only does it obscure any fans or radiators you might have behind it, but it also obscures 6 caddies back there that can accommodate both 3.5-inch hard drives or 2.5-inch SSDs. So in its default configuration, you have whatever drives you want to store in the caddies themselves. You also have 2 additional mounts for SSDs behind the motherboard tray. Now, these SSDs can be moved to the front Psu Shroud, but the only reason you can't have 10 drives simultaneously is because only 2 SSD caddies are included with the case. It's also worth noting here, this is like my 3rd case from Fractal, and they always do a really good job of making sure when the SSDs are flush mounted that you still have adequate clearance to get your cables plugged in. I know this seems obvious, but this has been an issue for me with cases from other manufacturers that cost much more. The other thing this storage plate does visually is cuts down on the amount of open space you have on the inside of the case. Sometimes cases are designed for water cooling and they have a lot of open space up front where you'd have like a push-pull thick rad configuration or a reservoir, and when you don't have anything there, it just looks like wide open empty space. So the big trick here is that all the drive caddies hiding behind the storage plate can be completely removed, and the storage plate can be pushed back into the case, creating a large opening for whatever water cooling equipment you may have. You can also do this if you just want some additional unobstructed airflow to your CPU cooler, but for my money, if you don't have any water cooling gear up front, it looks better pushed forward, and you get the benefit of being able to hang on to your storage. So the internal dimensions on this case are built to swallow some serious length in the GPU department. 300 millimeters with the storage plate in the front, or up to 465 millimeters with it pushed to the back. 460, that's not real, right? Your GPU can also be mounted vertically because this case does seemingly everything. The riser kit for this is an additional accessory. It'll get you for about 40 bucks on Newegg. I opted not to go this route because my cards are on air and it gets a little close to that glass panel there. I'm not a real big fan of the temps that creates. Steve over at Gamers Nexus did a really good portion on this in his review if you're curious about the details. However, if you are running a single card and that card is either a hybrid or part of a custom loop, this would be a really sick way to show off the bottom of that water block. Ooh, around back, you'll also find a SATA-powered PWM fan hub. This thing can control up to 6 additional 3-pin devices or 3 additional PWM devices. You'll also find a couple of Fractal Design's really awesome cable mounting strips back here and cable tie locations galore, just like sprinkled throughout the case. I think that about does it for features. Now, because this case is so insanely flexible and modular, it does me more good to tell you pretty much what you can't do than what you can. And as I'm eventually planning a custom water loop build in this thing, here's some stuff I noticed as I was trying out some different parts for fit. First off, yes, this case can fit an eATX board, and it does a pretty damn good job. Even with that board in there, you still have clearance for all your cable pass-through gaskets, which has been an issue in some other cases I've tried. Here you're looking at an EVGA classified Z170 board. Now, one thing to note here, if your board manufacturer does some goofy shit like puts 90-degree 24-pin connectors or 90-degree USB 2 connectors here, you're gonna have a problem. No matter how I tried to get this 24-pin connector in here, it simply would not go because of the angle that the cable had to bend coming through that pass-through. If you've got custom cables, this might be easier to pull off because you can like squeeze them flatter, but with a default cable coming off a modular power supply, you're gonna have a rough go of it here. The USB 2s were completely unusable for me because once that board was mounted all the way, the gaskets coming through the PSU were not set far enough back to allow me to actually get those plugs in, even if I wired it before mounting the board all the way. Now, luckily, the 90-degree SATA ports were no problem at all. As for air CPU coolers, you have a total tower height of 185 millimeters to work with. So that's gonna accommodate even some of the largest CPU coolers out there, like the Dark Rock Pro 3 or 4 from Be Quiet or the R1 Ultimate from CryoRig. One big surprise here is that if your board happens to be equipped with an additional 4-pin power connector near the bottom of the board to provide additional power to the PCIe lanes for overclocking, there is actually a pass-through cut into the shroud for that already. A really smart move. Now, as for storage, if you're gonna go the open route and ditch the caddies, you're obviously gonna be sacrificing a lot of storage. The alternate mounts on the back of the storage plate are only designed to hold 2 hard drives back there. So that's gonna leave you with 2 SSDs, 2 hard drives, and whatever M.2 configuration you have on the motherboard itself. If you're also using a lighting controller like a Hue Plus that takes up an SSD mount, that's gonna limit you further. This probably isn't gonna be a big deal if this is a gaming or a show rig, but if it's also pulling double duty as an editing rig or a workstation, this could be an issue here. At the time I shot this, I can't confirm whether or not you can or can't order additional SSD caddies directly from Fractal. Now, if you wanna show off your SSDs and mount them on the Psu Shroud instead of behind the motherboard, you're gonna face an additional problem here. On the right side mount, that pass-through is positioned perfect to bring your cables through, but there is no corresponding pass-through for the left side mount, which means all those cables are gonna be coming out that one pass-through and moving across. It'll work, but it's not gonna look the cleanest. As for fans and radiators, you have a ton of options here with a few limitations. First off, yes, you can fit a 420 millimeter rad in the top, but only with the drive bay gone and only with the storage plate in the open position. If you're trying to use a 280 millimeter rad in the roof of the case, you're gonna have an issue with memory clearance. The manual suggests you can't go over 36 millimeters in height. As most of the flashier, newer memory is gonna be taller than that with the heat sinks, you're best to stick to a 120 millimeter variant of some sort for the roof. On that same note, the manual also states that you can fit a 360 millimeter radiator in the ceiling of that case with the storage plate in the forward position. You cannot do that. The storage plate actually partially blocks one of the fan rails in the mounting plate up top. Now you can, if your radiator sits perfectly flush with the sides of your fan, you may be able to use the inside rails on the mounting plate to hold the radiator, but then you're going to be right back to the same issue with memory clearance. If it was me, I would go a different route and avoid the headache of that configuration altogether. And while you can technically fit a 240 or 280 millimeter rad in the bottom of the case, it's not without a couple issues. First, the length of that radiator down there is almost going to certainly cause a problem with the length of your power supply. Here we see a Corsair AX1200, and it's absolutely not going inside that case. The only way you could get this done is using a short throw power supply. I usually recommend like a Silverstone Strider 1000 watt for any instance where PSU length is going to be an issue. The second issue is the positioning of the Psu shroud itself. Because you can't remove that, it makes it extremely difficult to get a radiator with fans mounted to it down inside that hole. I'm sure it's possible in like some ship in a bottle kind of way, but it's extremely difficult. But you can easily fit a single 140 millimeter rad, even a thick one like this Black Ice 140 GTX in the bottom, and still have room for push-pull fan configuration. So there's that. The last thing to be aware of here is that if you are going to use an eATX motherboard and you plan on using the fill port cutout in the top tray, you have to be a little conscious of the distance between the bottom of the fill port with the necessary fitting attached and the top of the 24-pin connector itself. You got about 2 or 3 inches to get out of the way of that connector. So you're gonna have to get a little creative to make that look clean and not cause too much restriction. All that said, the front of the case is still extremely flexible. Even with the storage plate in the forward position and all the caddies in place, you still have room for a 360 millimeter rad with fans in the front. Once you open that plate up, you can go as thick as you want on the rad, go push-pull, still have room for a tube reservoir, do whatever you need to do in the front of the case. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this is seriously the most flexible case I've ever seen for whatever kind of build you're looking to do. There is a huge difference between a case that has room for what you're trying to do and a case that is thoughtfully designed to help you execute a build that's based around air, custom water cooling, or literally any point in between. Now, in a perfect world, we would have seen this case come with USB-C, a couple extra SSD caddies, maybe even a vertical GPU mount included, but that would have pushed the price tag closer to $200. Whereas right now, depending on colorway and configuration, this can be had on Newegg from anywhere from $120 to $150. Big thanks to Fractal Design for sending this out for review. I'm not going to do an Amazon affiliate link on this one because I feel like it's overpriced, so shoot for Newegg instead. You may have noticed or lamented the lack of any kind of integrated RGB lighting in this case, but I don't really feel like that's ever been Fractal's deal. What you do get instead is thoughtful, minimal design, and just insane build quality. All in all, man, this is one of the best cases I've ever had the opportunity to check out, and I'm super stoked to do a custom build inside this thing at some point. Oh, there's just so much here. I know I probably missed some things, but I tried to hit all the important stuff. If you have any questions about specific clearances or fitment, hit me up in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer those over the next week. That's it for this time. I'm Brian P. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that sub button, and until next time, stay up. Brian, why do you always have cat hair in your B-roll? Well, I'll show you why.